Howdy folks, welcome back to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. So, what's been new this week? Well, Wargaming are trying something new with your replays. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but when you upload your replays to whatreplays.com, certainly on the EU server, there's a new button after you've uploaded your replay called Submit to BRW. People have been saying, well, what the hell's BRW? Well, this is Best Replays of the Week. This is a new video series that Wargaming have been doing on their own official channel every week. And up until now, it's been limited to the Russian server only. Now, a lot of people were fairly upset about that, but it turns out that the reason why it was limited to the Russian server was because of the way it's been integrated into World Attacks Replays.ru. And the reason why it wasn't rolled out on the EU server was because they were waiting for the World Attacks Replays.com integration to come into effect. And so the way it works now is you just upload your replays, and then on the replay page there's a new button, Send to BRW. And if you think the replay is good enough, and I must warn you, the competition to get your video picked for Best Replays of the Week is pretty spectacular. But if you think your replay is good enough, you can just click the Send to BRW button and you've got a chance of winning yourself. I think currently the prizes are 6,500 gold if your video gets chosen in any one of those categories. And there's a whole bunch of different categories. You can send your video in to be shown in the warm-up, where it'll just be shown and it won't have a chance of winning a prize. There's Steel Wall of the Week, Scout of the Week, Top Gun of the Week. There's an overall Best Replay of the Week. The competition for these prizes, however, is absolutely... Well, I'll just give you an example. The video that I watched, the latest one from the Russian server, there was a Stug 3 who was standing alone against 10 enemies and won. That's the kind of game that is currently making it onto Best Replays of the Week, and the competition is only going to get worse, because now it's not just replays from the Russian server. Now everybody on the EU server is sending them in as well. I mean, I sent 2 in before I looked at the video and saw the kind of tank driving I was going up against, and there's just no chance. You are never going to see one of my replays featured on Best Replays of the Week. They're just not good enough. Now, a word of warning, however. This is pure speculation on my behalf. The service hasn't been up long enough for me to understand completely how it works. However, if you are thinking of submitting a replay and you play on the North American or the Southeast Asian servers, for example, i.e. not the Russian and not the EU server, be careful, because in order to upload onto worldoftacks.com, you have to create an EU server account. And what may happen, right, and I don't know this is going to happen, but I don't know it's not going to happen either, so just, be warned. What may happen is that if you send in a replay that's good enough and does get featured on Best Replays of the Week and wins 6,500 gold, there's a good chance that that gold could be awarded to the EU server account that you created to upload the video on, which is no good whatsoever to you if you play on the North American or Southeast Asian server. So take that into consideration if you're thinking about uploading a great game to worldoftacks.replays.com and you play on the Southeast Asian and North American server. There's no guarantee that your actual account, if you win, is going to get the prize. It's something that is worth further investigation. But I do highly recommend checking out the Best Replay of the Week video series that Wargaming are doing on their own official channel. I'll put a link to it in the video description, and the video description of the Best Replays of the Week video contains full instructions on how to go about submitting your replays to the video series. Speaking of new video series, here's something that we're trying out for the first time on this week's Mingles with Jingles. Let's run this one up the flagpole and see who salutes. And introducing a new section in Mingles with Jingles, we have Wanker of the Week, starting off with number 7, an AMX AC46, who decided that oncoming Storm's Nashorn really didn't deserve to occupy that spot. Number 6 is this cockholstering of Flackbus, who spent the entire game trying to dry hump that ARL to death for taking his bush. Next we have a joint entry starting off with, there he is, the AMX F3 artillery who suicides just as the game is lost. But in the same game, not wanting to be outdone, there he is, slotting in at number 4. The enemy Hummel also manages to top himself rather than go down fighting. But it's not over yet. There he is, the enemy T150 slides in at number 3. Number 2 is a joint entry shared between this T21, who, yes, spent the entire game hiding behind the farmhouse here at the back of the map, and only moved when pushed aside by this IS-6, who decided that clearly that spot was a much better place for a heavy tank to be occupied. And in the number 1 spot, watch out Jingles, that's friendly artillery behind you who thinks he's in a tank destroyer, and yes, there is no game you can be playing that is so good it cannot be ruined by friendly artillery who just don't give a shit. Stay tuned next week for more wankers, there are plenty of them, this is World of Tanks after all. So how do you like them apples? I figured I'd include this section in Mingles with Jingles, rather than giving it its own dedicated video, because there's a bit of naming and shaming went on in that video, and you're not allowed to post videos on the official World of Tanks forum, which is where most of my World of Tanks videos go, if they name and shame other players. And since I don't put Mingles with Jingles up on that forum thread anyway, because it contains footage like this of War Thunder, and it's not really polite to post footage of competitor games on Wargaming's own forum, so Mingles with Jingles seems like the best place to include Wanker of the Week. And don't worry, I'm sure there will be more than enough footage for future Wanker of the Week compilations, because hey, you know, it's World of Tanks. Unlikely to be any War Thunder footage in Wanker of the Week, because it could get boring after a while. It would just be a whole bunch of people going, oh look, there's Jingles, kill him. This next shout out, this is really weird. This next shout out goes to Dominic from Germany. Or more appropriately, it goes to Dominic's 3-year-old son, Alexander. Dominic found that while he was listening to Mingles with Jingles videos, that little Alexander really liked the sound of my voice. And so when Dominic was putting Alexander to bed at night, Alexander would say, you know, in German obviously, "Daddy, I want to hear Jingles." And so Dominic went and made a CD of Mingles with Jingles commentary. And instead of reading his son stories to put him to sleep at night, he just puts a CD of me talking on. You couldn't make this stuff up. So I think that's amazing. So just for little Alexander, I am going to attempt to speak German. You ready? Here it comes. Aufmerksam sein, gut zu hören. Gute Nacht, Alexander. And that was me attempting to say, pay attention, listen carefully, good night, Alexander. And that's about the best I can do with Google Translate. So that was for Dominic's son, Alexander. Bless him, he's only 3. So, should I answer some actual questions in this week's Mingles with Jingles? I know, you can't do that. This is Mingles with Jingles. You're supposed to waffle on for half an hour without actually answering anybody's question. But I'm trying new things this week. So here's one from Diabolical Derper. Great name, by the way. And he wants to know, Jingles, would you ever consider doing video guides on how to drive light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, etc., etc.? And that's not something I've ever done. And the reason I've never done it is actually a pretty good one, and it's this. They're all different. And I don't just mean you drive a heavy tank differently to the way you drive a light tank or a medium tank and so on and so on. But even within the same class of vehicle, there are massive differences. I mean, you look at a Chaffee, and then you look at an AMX-40. They're both light tanks, and there's only one tier difference between them, but you try driving an AMX-40 the same way you drive a Chaffee, and you let me know how well you get on. Now, you might think it would be easier to do a sort of heavy tank guide, because, I mean, you know, a heavy tank's a heavy tank. But, yeah, what about, well, you try driving an IS-3 the same way you drive an AMX 5100. Well, you can't. It's not fast enough. And you can try to drive an AMX 5100 the same way you would drive an IS-3, but you're not going to do very well. And yet they're both Tier 8 heavy tanks. You've got light tanks that drive like medium tanks. Crusader, I'm looking at you. You've got medium tanks that drive like heavy tanks. Hello, Super Pershing. You've got heavy tanks that drive like medium tanks. Hello, AMX 5100 and IS-8. You've got tank destroyers like the T-30, which is basically the T-34 heavy tank with a bigger gun. Tank destroyers like the Jagdtiger and the Ferdinand, which you can use as an aggressive frontline assault gun, if the situation is suitable for it. Other tank destroyers which you in no circumstances would ever put anywhere near the front line, like the NAS one. So that's the reason why I never have, and I'm never going to do, a light tank guide, or a medium tank, or heavy tank, or tank destroyer guide, because there are just too many differences between the various different vehicle classes. And that's why I try to cover individual tactics for individual machines within individual tank reviews. And yeah, I do realise that when I posted my WZ132 video, I also called it the Light Tank Guide, and that was probably the wrong title to use. It wasn't so much a light tank guide as a scouting guide. And, you don't have to be in a light tank to use the tips and tactics that I posted in that video. And I've seen people in tank destroyers and medium tanks using those strategies that I posted in that video very, very successfully. And so calling it a light tank guide was probably a little disingenuous. It was a scouting guide, which is something that the WZ132 happens to be able to do very well. But by the same token, there are plenty of light tanks that are awful scouts. The AMX-40 just being the most obvious example. Not all light tanks are the same. Not all medium tanks are the same. Not all heavies. Not all tank destroyers. Not even all artillery. Look at the FV304, for example. Is it a artillery? Is it a light tank? Is it a tank destroyer? It just depends entirely on how you play it. So no, I'm not going to. I have never yet, and I have no plans to do medium tank guides or heavy tank guides, or so on and so on. Tips and tactics for each individual tank will, as always, be included in the reviews that I do of each individual tank. This next one, it's not really a question, it's a comment. It was posted on last week's Mingles with Jingles. It's from Heir of Massilia. Just listen to this. He said, "Hi Jingles, my name is Jingles on War Thunder as well. I'm currently level 10 on War Thunder. Can you give a shout out in your next Mingles with Jingles video? Because I'm sick of being confused with you on the North American server for War Thunder. So I'd appreciate it if you make my existence known to everyone who watches your vids and calls me troll and fake Jingles. I use the in-game username for most of my gaming, and it's really getting on my nerves being chased around the map by 5 or 6 Fokker Wolves." Yeah, I sympathise, obviously. And I don't want to sound like a broken record constantly going on about the same thing, so we'll just say, I know how you feel, and you know how I feel. And you have my sympathies, and we'll leave it at that. Here's a good question from Quantum Gaming Studio 1. He wants to know, Jingles, do you British people look down at Americans like we are some kind of scum? My social studies teacher seems to think so. Now, while I usually try to stay away from any kind of question that involves politics or religion, I do actually think this is a really, really good question, and I think I can give a good answer to it. As usual, you're going to get a quick answer, and then you're going to get a long answer, and the quick answer is yes. Certain British people do look down on Americans as if they're some kind of scum. Stupid, ignorant, uneducated British people look down on Americans as if they're some kind of scum. The same way that stupid, uneducated, and willfully ignorant people of any nationality look down on any other group of people. It's because they're idiots. But talking specifically about Britain and America, I think there are historical reasons that provide a basis for this. Well, I'm not going to say hate. Hate's too strong a word. For a start, America is the only country that's beaten Britain in a war in, well, hundreds of years. And Britain used to be top dog. And now it isn't anymore. The British Empire used to cover a quarter of the globe. And the Second World War put an end to that. The Second World War bankrupted most of the countries that were involved in it. But not America. America actually came out of the war with a stronger economy than with which it went into the war. Yeah, and it came out, top dog, occupying the number one spot that Britain had occupied, arguably, prior to the Second World War. So there's that historical jealousy, if you like, of America taking over the centre stage from Britain as the dominant world power. And then you have a sort of national inferiority complex that you have to take into account as well, because not only has America taken over Britain's #1 spot in the world, but Britain is now very much reliant on America. So it's as if, you were the big bully in the playground, and then a bigger bully comes along and takes your #1 spot, and you now have to rely on that bully for your own safety and security. There's going to be a certain amount of resentment that goes along with that, even though you can't afford to piss the big bully off. And I do realise that I'm simplifying things massively here, but you also need to understand that I'm simplifying things massively here because this kind of gross simplification of hundreds of years of geopolitics is exactly the kind of level at which these simpletons understand and use as a basis for why we don't like America. Hundreds of years of complex geopolitics boiled down to we're jealous. And no, they'll never admit that, but that's what it boils down to. You're at the top, we're not at the top anymore. We have hundreds of years of history and tradition, thousands of years of history and tradition. Where have you been? That is the attitude. That's the kind of simple attitude that we're dealing with here. However, and there's a big however coming here, I keep saying America's #1 now. Well, is it? China's looking pretty good. And, before you rush and are too quick to judge on the attitudes of, stupid British people towards America, because that's what it is, just consider the attitude that Americans have toward China. I always thought it was hilarious that you could always judge American attitudes based on who the bad guys are in their computer games. Right? During the 80s and the 90s, it was always the Russians. And then, when the Berlin Wall came down and the Russian Empire collapsed, suddenly it became brown people. All the bad guys in your computer games were brown people with Kalashnikovs and RPGs. But lately, the more and more nervous America's been getting about China, the more the Chinese have been appearing as the bad guys in American computer games. And while your social studies teacher is absolutely 100% correct that there are a lot of stupid, petty, ignorant British people who are jealous of America's position on the world stage, because America took it from Britain, completely disregarding the fact that if Britain was strong enough to hold on to the #1 spot, America wouldn't have been able to take anything from them, but who nevertheless cling to this vastly oversimplified version of global geopolitics as an excuse for why they resent America. However, stupid, petty and resentful British people are not unique. Have a look at the average American attitude towards the Chinese, and do you see any similarities? Because I think I do. And there's nothing particularly surprising about this. It's the natural reaction of the stupids when they see something that they think of as being rightfully theirs taken away from them by somebody that they are powerless to stop. So yeah, while in broad terms your social studies teacher is correct, that particularly after the Second World War, and still there are lingering traces of it today, that the British did or do look down on Americans as scum. It's absolutely no different to the way the average American is starting to consider the Chinese, and for exactly the same reasons. Now, I probably shouldn't have answered that question because I can only just imagine the fun and games that are going to erupt in the comment section of this video as a result, but I thought it was a very, very good question, and I felt that I could give it a good answer, and I hope you're satisfied with it. Speaking of answering questions, or not answering questions, the Hiltonator noted in last week's Mingles with Jingles, the Emergency Man Flu edition, that I hadn't actually answered a single question, and he wants to know, Jingles, do you think this is a new era in response videos? I'm not going to answer that question. Spartan Industries what? I like this question. He says, Jingles, once you complete world domination via YouTube, what do you plan to do with the world and what new laws will you make? Well, obviously I can't go into great detail about my secret genius gnome evil master plan for taking over the world, but once world domination is secure and you're all slaving away happily in the salt mines, there are going to be some changes around here. For a start, there'll be no more gold ammo. Right? If you can't penetrate that heavy tank from the front in your T-54, then go around the side like you're supposed to. And if you can't go around the side, well, you've lost, haven't you? You've been outplayed. Deal with it. And War Thunder, don't think you're getting away with it. Sit there hiding in the corner thinking I haven't noticed you. What's with this battle rank system? I mean, seriously? First you had 20 ranks of aircraft, and everybody understood that. That was fine. And then you said, no, actually now there's only going to be 5 ranks of aircraft. And not everybody understood why there were going to be 5 ranks of aircraft, but 5 ranks is easier to understand than 20 ranks. But then you started throwing around this battle rank number. But you didn't sort the aircraft by battle rank, even though the battle rank is the most important feature of the aircraft, because it determines your matchmaking. It determines the kind of planes that you're going to get thrown up against, and it therefore determines the kind of planes that you should have in your lineup. But do you sort the aircraft by battle rank? No, of course not. That would make sense. Here's a suggestion. In fact, it's not a suggestion. This is what you're going to do when I take over the world. Since the rank of the aircraft is completely irrelevant, except for purposes of researching the next aircraft, you're going to stop sorting aircraft by rank on the battle selection screen. You are instead going to start sorting them by battle rank. So, I will actually stand a chance of being able to pick a sensible lineup of aircraft that all share similar battle ranks. And I'm not going to have to sit around waiting for a pop-up to appear showing me the kind of information that should be presented by default in the first place. Okay? Okay. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to get doorknobs lowered to a sensible height. About 2 feet from the ground should do. I mean, seriously, who's taller than 3 feet anyway? And if you don't like it, well, we can always have your legs cut off at the knees, can't we? Any objections? No, I didn't think so. Yeah, the laugh could probably use a bit of work. That's it for this week, folks. Take care. See you next time.